Peculiar.
That was.
Oh, that's the one you stopped.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And we're live on YouTube.
Peculiar is a hard word to say.
Mm-hmm.
You have to like really slow down to say it.
Peculiar.
Live on Facebook.
That was what Juan decided to name the title of the last one we did.
All right. That's fine. I think I should come down a little bit.
Yeah. Come to our level.
We're on the Lord's team, the winning side, so raise your glass.
Welcome to the Catholic Man Show. We are on the Lord's team, the winning side, so raise your glass. Adam Mcmahon here, sitting with David Niles in studio, Juan on the buttons, and we have a good friend of ours, a repeat guest, the Catholic, the Catholic Superintendent of the Diocese of Tulsa and Eastern Oklahoma, David Dean. Thanks for coming and hanging out with us again.
Thanks, guys. It's great to be here.
The last episode we did was on sports and virtue, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun to talk about, because a topic that Dave and I have discussed for many hours on how do we use sports in a good way for your children, but not to where it dominates
not as
your life.
Idolized and
Right. So we had a really great conversation. So you can go check that out on thecatholicmanshow.com to listen to that episode. But David, we're very happy to have you here in the diocese. One of the things that we said in the last episode, or the one we had with you, was one of the things that you're renowned for is being in the integrated humanities program from Kansas State. Or Kansas, I'm sorry, not Kansas
University
State.
of Kansas.
University of Kansas.
which
with
is
John
in
Senior.
the state of Kansas.
Which is in
Yes.
the state
Right.
of Kansas.
Yes.
Yes. But with John Senior and Dr. Quinn and what was it?
Dr. Nellick.
Nellick, yes. So you were telling me this in the hall. One of the awesome things about working in the diocese is that we have, I get to work with you and Dr. Malash and Dean Garlick and Sarah Jameson, all these people who have just fascinating life stories, who have had a chance to meet with a lot of different people.
Yeah.
And so I walked down the hallway and you were telling me this story about being in Ireland with Dr. Senior and a bunch of other people, and I realized this is a great story. We should talk about it on the show. And so so here you are.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it's great to be here, and as always.
Yeah.
I know we've done this before, but just for people who aren't familiar with the Integrated Humanities Program, just give a brief overview of what that was
Good
and
call.
why it's important.
Well, of course, it was sort of a form of a great books program. It was 2 years. The first semester was Greek, second Romans, third medieval, and fourth modern. And 3 professors taught it as in a conversational mode. They would just read a passage from the Iliad or the Odyssey, and then the 3 of them would discuss it in front of us. And there's about 100 of us in the class, and there was, you couldn't take notes, and they did not read from notes, and there was a lecture from notes, and so we really had to sit and listen and exercise our memories and sort of enter into the moment of that passage and how they, sort of enlightened and explicated that particular passage and what it meant and so forth. And so, again, a 2-year program, and there were other parts of it. We had to memorize poetry, and there was stargazing, and we had a waltz at the end of the year, and just a rhetoric class. So it was it really formed our imaginations in a particular way that to orient us toward goodness and truth and beauty in a way that I think most of us had never even imagined. When I was in the program, we were coming off the 60s, and the hippie element at KU was very strong. It was known as the Berkeley of the Midwest at the time. They tried to burn down the Union, I think, in 68 or 69, and I think the student was actually shot. as part of that whole time frame. And so, again, there was this sort of bohemian atmosphere on campus. And in the midst of all that, you know, the sort of drugs, sex, and rock and roll, as they used to say, of the 60s and 70s, was you had this little program going on with these three professors and these students, and talking about, again, the good, the true, and the beautiful. And I think we all know what, or most people know what came out of that, or from that, or flowed from that. And this particular event we're going to talk about was my senior year. The professors decided to take a group of us to Ireland, and that was it was all the students. I mean, anyone from freshmen to seniors could go, and even some former students. A couple of former students went. And so we were there for an entire semester. It was sort of based out of Galway. We took classes at the University of Galway, and of course the three professors taught classes, and so we had a full academic schedule. Every student did, and there were about 100 of us. And so we divided up into really two essential groups, and we spent half the time in Galway, and then while half of us were in Galway, the other half were on this island called Inishbofin.
Inishbofin.
Which I believe is Gaelic for the white cow. Island of the white cow.
Not what I thought you were going to say.
No. And but it was I think it's important to state up front that the professors had this vision by going to Ireland that we could go back in time to a place that was much different than, 1970s America, because this would have been in 1976. We took the trip, and that, a lot less even technology. I mean, I know we have much more now than we did then, but to really go back to a place where we could see maybe what it was like to some degree, maybe 100 or so years ago, and especially when we were on Inishbofin on the island, there was no electricity as we know it. It was all the energy that was generated from a generator, and so when they turned the generator off, there's no electricity on the island.
So they didn't have a refrigerator or things like that.
No, they had some, but they when the generators would go off at night, it's usually about midnight, and then they'd crank them up about 6 a.m. So
mostly
I guess,
for lights.
Yes, lights. But I think the hotels had a couple refrigerators. There were 2 hotels on the island that had some refrigerators, and of course, it's in January, it's very very cold there anyway. But it was really unique because when the lights went off, they were off. If you look on a map, Inishbofin is 7 miles west of Ireland. So actually, to get there, we had to go on a boat run by this charming fellow named Paddy. And that was truly his name. Right? I'm not making that up. It's not poetic license. And he was wonderful as we would go across the water. He would tell us stories. And I was saying earlier, on some of the days, the waters were up and very rough. And so we didn't hear many stories that day because we were all busy throwing up over the side of the boat. But it has a way of bringing you together, right? There's nothing like throwing up with someone in the ocean together.
Group suffering, yeah.
Yes, yeah. And some were crawling. There was a little thing under the boat, and
that's why fraternities used to haze. It's like,
that's right. That's right. It's
bring you together as a
real
class.
Bonding.
Yeah.
Yes, a real bonding. So remember that? Remember that day?
Works for the military.
Yeah, you threw up all over me. Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah.
That was great. It was the best.
Yeah.
That was the day I knew we'd be friends forever.
Yes. You can't say that about everybody. And but anyway, it was a great experience, and I think we learned so much on that trip. But I know this morning we wanted to talk about a particular event.
Yeah, but so before we do, so they wanted you to go kind of back in time, so to speak, to Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Why? What was the why out of everywhere in the world? Why did they pick there? What was the purpose of going there?
Well, I think at the time it was probably one of the few places you could go that you could kind of step back in time, and it of course the Irish are very poetic, as we all know. They're known for their poetry for centuries and centuries, right? And it's a place that's easy to walk. They have those terms of Ireland, to sort of amble across the heath or something like that, and down the little rocky paths and past the hedgerows, and at night, you think you see a leprechaun, in in the hedgerow, and we had some really interesting experiences that way. That by just out walking at night and kind of entering into that mysterious way of looking at a very poetic way of looking at things. That, well, maybe there is a leprechaun, in the hedgerow, and the Irish would kind of wink at you. They'd tell you stories about when they were pretty sure they saw one, right? Or you could go out with 7 miles off the coast, and there's no electricity. I mean, the stars were just glorious, right? I mean, you could see the stars on a clear night. And
do you think that was one of the biggest sells for him? Like, do you think that's why the stars?
I think so. And it was, would have been a relatively safe place, because they had in the program, a couple years before, they'd done some trips to Italy and in Greece, respectively, and there was a lot of problems there at the time. The Red Party, the Communist Party, both in Athens and in Italy, were very strong in the late 60s, early 70s. And so I think Ireland was seen as a relatively safe place to go to. I mean, because they had to, with 100 kids, you had to be a little careful in that regard. And so, yeah, I think a lot of things entered into it. It's just there's something that about Ireland, the castles and everything, it really pulls on your imagination, and you're able, at least to some degree, to enter into the past and what that must have looked like.
And if they're trying to expose you to the true, the good, and the beautiful, Ireland is a place where the beautiful is inescapable.
That's right. Even in their voices, right? I mean, the
exactly.
lilt of the language, the way they speak and acted in a very simple life, especially on the island. It was people that were very simple, and I mean that is of course a compliment. That sort of innocence and virtue and that goes with that. And though there's another interesting story there too, they had the, honest and not being critical here, but there was kind of a village drunk, right? As you read about in literature, and they had one, and they were very nice to him. And then when he got a little out of control or something, a couple of the men would take him back to the house and say, "Okay, Jonah, you've had enough now. Come on, let's go home." And they'd walk him home, and everybody's kind of okay with it, right? It was very real.
Yeah.
Very human.
It's a community, a real community.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're here with David Dean, Catholic Superintendent of the schools in the Diocese of Tulsa in Eastern Oklahoma. We're going to continue the story of him with John Sr. and 100 students in Ireland back in 1976. We'll be right back. Yeah.
Okay.
Welcome back to the Catholic Man Show. I'm David Niles here with Adam Mcmahon. Our special guest today is Mr. David Dean, a man of many talents, many stories, many languages.
I don't know about that.
We also, we did mention
Come
on the
on.
show a while back that we were taking Latin classes, and you're the teacher for the Latin classes here in the diocese.
Yes.
And you used the same method that John Sr. used.
Correct. Very oral method. Ask a lot of questions, go around the room, pick out objects, have them respond. Like, hello, hey, or, salve, quo modo vales, and just enter into a real conversation with them.
Right.
In Latin.
Yeah, I'm not sure how many people there are who are teaching Latin in that way today. Like if people who are listening to us, if they even have an opportunity or a place to go to like learn Latin like that. But if they do, I would highly recommend it, because I've told many people on the first day of class, you were just up there saying things in Latin, and it was very strange because I knew what you were saying. And
Good.
I don't speak, it's like, this is first class. I don't speak Latin, okay?
There you go.
But
See,
I
it's
don't
there.
get it because I know what you're saying, it was I was shocked. And a lot of that is because you've had practice, and you're very expressive and knew we're going to start simple, right?
But it's there, right? I mean, it's something that it touches something in you, right? And even if it's foreign in one sense, it's not in another sense.
Yeah.
And I think that's the beauty of it. We want the language to become part of you, our English word language comes from the Latin word lingua, which means tongue.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, language is not just a mental concept or construct. It's should be in our tongues. It should be in our hands. We're expressive, and our fingers, our toes, our bodies, and so forth. And so, that's what real human language is. And so it I believe it also one remembers it longer, right? It really enters into your memory and your imagination. And so if you talk to someone maybe 10 years after they've had Latin, if they've had oral Latin, they're more likely to remember things than if they had it the more traditional way, like trying
Where you're just conjugating verbs all day.
Yeah, and maybe memorizing it out of a book, which is, at the end of the day, pretty boring. And you do it, so you get on to the next chapter and whatever, get your A, hopefully. And
Right, because one, you're memorizing Latin, and then the other one, you're speaking Latin.
Correct.
Different things.
And I think any person who's learned any language, any modern language, is the hardest part, of course, is to speak it. Because then it's coming from you.
Right,
You're not reading off a page where the word's already there for you, and you're assuming they're done accurately and correctly. The grammar.
Right.
So you're having to generate that thought within your own mind and express it in your own way, and so that's obviously more difficult.
That's why it's easier to translate
Yes.
Latin than it is to just speak it, right? But when you speak it, there's like a consummation with the language, right? It's
That's
like
right.
the two becoming one, and now it's like Latin is now part of you.
Correct, and I think that we say this about the French, for example. That I think they're part of who the French are is their language. We talk,
certainly.
We talk about that. That's a very French thing, right? The way they speak and we even tied into their personality. And so I think language is part of personality, right? And I'm sure it's true with the Spanish and the
definitely
the Germans. I mean,
There's a reason why
race,
the
right?
Germans are engineers.
Correct.
Because the German language is very precise.
Correct.
It lends itself towards an engineering mind.
Right. Exactly.
The movie Contact, I think it's Contact. No, not Contact. That's with Jodie Foster. It's about aliens, though. It came out just a few years ago. I'll think about it. But anyway, it's about language and how learning a different language changes the way you think, right? And
it does. Absolutely does.
It definitely does.
There's no question. You learn even. I took French early on, and you learn so much about French culture and how they think, because they think differently. Every group
Arrival.
Arrival. That's the movie. Thank you, Juan.
Yeah.
You recommended it, and I saw it. It's very good.
Arrival is a great movie. It's like I do recommend that movie.
Yeah, I'll have to watch that. I haven't seen that.
It's all about it'll. Anyway, you should definitely watch it. It's a good movie.
I'll have to do that. Yeah. So I think language is part of who we are, and if we can learn other languages, we learn a lot more about, of course, those people and how they think and work and play and live life. And then I think that kind of broadens our horizon too. By doing that, you begin to see the world in a different way, and I think that's a good thing for, especially today, right? When
and you learn so much more about your own language.
Correct.
It's like, we say it this way, and it's like, and they say it. Oh, you guys say it like that. That's interesting. I've never thought about, that nuance to this idea or this word or this expression, the meaning of something.
No, it's really true, David, and it's they estimate 2/3 of English comes from Latin, and some of that's directly and some's indirectly. In other words, Latin to French to English or Latin Spanish to English and so forth. But that's a big part of our vocabulary, right? 2/3 of it, and so you begin to learn the roots of words, or maybe how they've morphed, over time, where it meant this 500 years ago, but today the word has this shade of meaning, and so you got to work through that, and it does require. I think it broadens your mind. It forces you to think precisely, and of course Latin and Greek particularly are very good for precision. And I think this is, why the church will put all their documents in Latin, because it's not going to change.
Well, yeah, that's a benefit. It's a dead language, and praise God. I mean, well, it's not.
No, it's
that's
not
good.
That. We are speaking Latin, David.
But it's good. It's good because it's not. Like English. Think about how much the meaning of English words have changed over the last 10 years. Like we don't even know what a woman is anymore.
I know.
Okay. So like mulieris dignitatem, if that was written in English, like that would be all of a sudden about nothing.
Exactly.
So the fact that Latin isn't, people don't speak it in a way where there's nuance into the introduced into the language, it preserves the meaning of those documents.
We could call it non-binary dignitatem.
Okay, so John Senior, so they took you out to Ireland. You and 100 students.
Yeah, roughly 100.
Roughly 100 students. You guys get out there, and you said you're in two places, Galway and Inishbofin. Inishbofin. And you'd go change between each one, right? 2 weeks here, 2 weeks here, 2 weeks. So you're there. So tell us what happens.
We arrived right at the middle of January, and so of course one group was in Galway, and the other half went out to the island in Inishbofin, and so it was right around, I think, February 2nd or 3rd. It was time to switch, and so we get on a bus. I was in Galway, and I remember Dr. Senior was on the bus, and we were getting on, and you could tell something was wrong. It was my senior year, and so as a senior, there were several, a number of other seniors, and we would kind of help, in a minor way, just direct, or help the younger students and so forth. And since I knew Dr. Senior pretty well by that point, I could tell something was really wrong. He just wasn't acting himself. And so once we got on the bus, we made an announcement that two of the boys that had been on the island the last 2 weeks with the other group were missing. That they'd gone out the night before, and they had not come back to either one of the hotels. And so, of course, this was then the next morning, and they still hadn't been found. So everybody was worried and very worried. And so he said, we're going to pray. And so we prayed a rosary, amongst other things, because it's about almost an hour trip from Galway on the bus up to Cleggan, which is a little port city that I mentioned earlier. We take the boat over to the island. And so, because we're praying the whole way, and we get on the boat, and we finally get to the island, and so they still haven't found the boys. These two boys, Richard Mathis and Ed Mall, were their names. And so again, just because I was an older student, the professors asked me and a couple others to go around the inside of the island. It's not that big of an island. Just walk on the inside. Maybe they're stuck in a cove or something, or maybe they got hurt, they can't walk.
Sure.
And so in the meantime, the island people, a lot of them are fishermen, so they were already getting in their boats because it was the morning time now, and they were going to go around just around the island and look in these different coves and places for them. And so we started that process that morning, and I just happened to be with a couple other guys, and we saw the boatmen sort of waving their hands in this particular cove, and so they had found the bodies. The boys underwater. So we went running over, and then obviously it was them, and unfortunately it was the two, but not wishing anything bad on anybody else, but it was and so one of the other guys ran back to the hotel to tell everybody, and so they went in, they got the bodies in the boat, and the fishermen then took the bodies back to and so what we found out was there was these rocks called the Stags, and there's a good picture on I think we're going to try to pull it up here at some point, but for you. But there's the island itself, and then because we did this at one point, it was later, but when it's low tide, you go across these rocks out to this big mound, and even during high tide, the mound is always above water. But remember, this is our first 2 weeks there. A couple boys from Kansas, right? We're not used to the ocean or anything like this. This island is 7 miles off the coast of Ireland, which is also an island. So you're literally out in the middle of the Atlantic. Well, the tide goes up and down about 15 feet a day in height. And they didn't know that. So when you look out from west of the island, you're looking at the Atlantic Ocean. The next piece of land is Canada, if you could see that far. And so they're looking at this probably beautiful sunset on the ocean, and the unbeknownst to them, the tide comes in very rapidly and very hard, and all of a sudden they look back, and the path to which they got onto this very sort of mound is not there. It's all water, and it's getting dark. It's January. It's cold. The mist, from the sea pounding on all these rocks and stuff is I'm sure it was very intimidating for them, not having grown up in around
Right.
the ocean,
Yeah.
being basically sort of Kansas farm boys, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So
Hang
we'll,
on
yeah,
right
stop
there. We'll
Yeah.
finish on the
Okay.
other side of the break.
We'll be right back. Yeah, let's just keep rolling so we don't forget our train of thought. Welcome back to the Catholic Man Show. Here with David Dean, talking about his trip to Ireland for the Integrated Humanities program back in the 70s. If you're just tuning in on Catholic Radio, go and check us out on thecatholicmanshow.com. You can check the whole podcast out because we're in the middle of a story. So the two boys, they're up. They realize the tide has elevated.
correct.
And they're stranded there.
Yeah, so they're looking at two options, right? Either stay on that mound all night, and from their perspective, they don't know if that's going to be underwater. Maybe at 3 a.m. I mean,
Right.
they've never been there before.
Right.
And or the second option is to try to get back across. So they chose the second option. But the water there is obviously cold, and with the tide coming in that strong, and there's these jagged rocks between the actual island and this mound. Patty, the boatman, told me later that on one of the trips that once they were in the water, it was over because
they're going to get hypothermia. And
yeah, it's so cold, and then the tide and the waves come in so strong there that it would throw the boys' bodies against the rocks,
Right.
and then the tide would pull them back out, and this just
you're hopeless.
you can't beat it, right? You can't
Right.
get out of it. And so happily, and I'll explain that in a moment, but happily the bodies were found in that little cove because the Gulf Stream current comes up, the Atlantic on the American side and swoops around up north and comes down past Ireland, and then of course on down, past England and France and so forth. And so this sort of thing's happened out there on the island, in days gone by, and sometimes they never find the bodies because the Gulf current will pick up the body, and sometimes they'll find the body down in France or Spain or somewhere, and sometimes they never find the bodies. So obviously now, knowing that this has happened to the boys, you obviously want to find the bodies, right? Because
Right.
for the parents' sake, so you
Yeah.
have a proper burial and all those good things. And so that's why I say happily, the bodies were found in this little cove, and then Dr. Quinn had the very difficult job of flying home, with the bodies and meeting the parents back in Kansas and attending the funerals and, obviously trying to explain what happened, how it happened, and so forth. And so he did all that. Of course, the other two professors stayed with us. And then there was, actually before Professor Quinn left to go back to Kansas for the funerals and so forth, the three professors met, and they told us that, we don't know. This was the first 2 weeks that we'd been in Ireland, and we were there for the whole semester. And they were really seriously thinking about just canceling the trip and going home.
Sure.
Like this had happened.
Yeah.
And so this is a horrible, horrible tragedy, and maybe it's just a sign we should go home. And, we were all, I was very upset. It was a very emotional kind of time for everybody. And so I think they made the right decision. We stayed. And I think for those of us as students, it really pulled us together. I didn't know Richard and Ed that well, but I certainly knew who they were. They were, I think, a year or two younger than me. But really good kids. I believe Ed was considering the priesthood. I think when he got back from the trip to Ireland, he was thinking about entering the seminary and so forth. And Richard may have had some ideas along that way too. But so we stayed, and I think we all pulled together. And the interesting thing was then the island people, and if you know the Irish, while they're very jovial and fun, we always see them singing songs, and having a good time and having a pint of Guinness and those good things. But actually, they're kind of shy, and reserved. And the island people just, of course, they felt horrible, right? certainly wasn't their fault or anything, but they just felt terrible for us. And we had this incredible bonding, and that lasted for almost up till now. I've been back down a couple of times, and all I have to do is say that I was in that program because I don't look like now what I did then, right? And they're just so warm and loving, and it really, really did pull us all together. And I think that once, after a little bit of time, and as we go back and forth, we're in the pubs and so forth with the natives of the island. We'd be sitting around drinking a pint of Guinness and just really entered into this much deeper conversations that might begin about the two boys, and then really get into more other serious things about life. It wasn't just joking around, telling jokes at the bar kind of thing anymore. And yet there was some of that. Obviously, we had a lot of fun there. I got duped once by one of the island men. I just bought a brand new Peterson pipe. Those are made in Dublin.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
It was the first time really I'd smoked a pipe, and so I bought this, like tobacco that was it was probably like the Michelob Ultra of pipe tobaccos. And so, and I don't know what this fellow's name was. His name was Patty. I don't know. And so he takes out his pocket knife and he cuts off this thing. It looks like a piece of tar. And and I can't do his accent very well, but it's like, come on, have a wee bit of this. Put this in your pipe and smoke it. And I'm an idiot, right? And so, okay. Got my new pipe. I'll break it in. So he puts it in there, and he's kind of smiling, and I've had several pints of Guinness by this point, as he, and so we're just having a great time. And I literally take about 2 puffs of this pipe, and I just head out the front door of the bar to the hedgerow and just toss it, and all over the place. And he comes kind of waddling out. He is an older fellow. He's just laughing. He goes, mate, he goes, come on in. He goes, I'm going to buy you a pint now. And he's kind of patting me on the back, And so once I finished my business in the bushes, we went back in and drank a couple more pints, and he just laughed the whole time. And of course, everybody in the bar was laughing, but I got a lot of free pints that night. And
so it was, it worked out.
It was worth it.
Out.
It was worth it. And I learned, when you first start to smoke a pipe, don't smoke something that looks like tar.
Yeah.
Or even ever, maybe.
Maybe ever.
Rule of thumb.
Maybe ever. But I just
not without doing some investigation.
Yes,
right?
yes. Lord knows what was in that thing. So
don't smoke tar from strangers. I think that's a takeaway.
No matter how many pints you've had, don't do that.
You could write that down.
Yeah, it's one of life's lessons. So, but I just tell the story because it really did pull us together, and that's the kind of, and not something like that happened all the time, but we would literally sit, around and talk to the people, and we would go to church sometimes, of course, and pray, obviously for the boys, and in addition to going to Sunday mass and so forth. So it was that kind of moment. So I think it was really good that we stayed for the remainder of the semester. And then very quickly, there's a movement, with the professors amongst a lot of students and different people to. They hired a gentleman, I've forgotten his name now, but he designed these beautiful stained glass windows, which are in the church now. They're on Inishbofin. We have pictures of them, I think, that can be put up honoring the 2 boys. And then later, after that, they also erected a cross out by the stags, very close to where the boys drowned. So there's
the cross.
Yeah, there's.
If you're on, go check us out on YouTube, so that way you can see that. But yeah, so they erected that on the island.
Correct, and I think if you look in the background, there is that sort of mound, and there's a little area there. I can't really see it, of course, because it's a lower elevation, but where you cross the rocks, and then.
And so that's the area that would have been underwater during high tide, right there.
Correct. Because, like I said, that tide wouldn't rise and fall about 10 or 15 feet a day.
Sure.
Yeah, and it's kind of another interesting story about the island is when you come into the port on Patty's little boat, there's a big rock, again, very similar to one of those you see in that picture, and it's called Bishop's Rock. And so when that charming fellow named Cromwell came to Ireland, he tied the bishop at the time to that rock and just waited for the tide to come in. And unfortunately, the bishop drowned on the rock. and thus it's called Bishop's Rock. And so this,
But he received the glory of martyrdom, which is incredibly awesome.
He did. He really did. And so, again, the sort of history there of these sort of things, and the knowing the land, and I think back to what we said at the start about why would we go to Ireland. I remember one of Dr. Senior's books. He talks about reality, and he talks about being a cowboy out in the in the rain coming off your anorak or your down your boots and your spurs, and that's something every young man should do, right? That have that experience of being on a horse and sitting by the campfire afterwards and drinking coffee out of some kind of metal mug or something, and I think it's similar in Ireland, to be out on these rocks and stuff and hear the sea crashing on the rocks, the mist coming up over you, and just taking in whatever sights are out there. It's like, okay, this is real.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, in a tragic way, it turned out to be too real.
Sure.
On that one particular day. But again, that immersion into reality. And
so you're there in Ireland, right off the bat. The trip starts off with this
Mm-hmm.
great tragedy, right? These
Correct.
two boys die.
Mm-hmm.
What did that do? I mean, you mentioned that the Islanders,
Mm-hmm.
really embraced you. Is there anything else that, like, you took away? Because this is a tragedy,
Mm-hmm.
but was there any redemption, like things that?
And we're about to
Said-
come up to a break, so
Okay.
That there is, and that's a great question. So we can
Okay. Yeah.
talk about that maybe.
And so what were the names of the boys again?
Ed Mall and Richard Mathis.
Ed Mall and Richard Mathis. So we
Mm-hmm.
can make sure we say a prayer for their souls,
Indeed.
and pray that they have entered into
Eternal glory.
Eternal glory.
Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely.
especially, like, that's awesome that even to think that at least one of them was considering entering the seminary as
Correct.
well.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
Not many people get to be in a stained glass window.
that's right.
that's right.
It's pretty cool.
That is cool. Very
So
cool. There they are.
yeah, there they are.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're here with David Dean talking about his trip to Ireland, and let's talk about some redemption, some things that maybe that came out of this tragedy. We'll be right back.
I think we got to do was a couple of us got to go. Have you heard of the Legion of Mary?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The founder of it lived in Dublin, Frank Duff,
Hmm.
and we got to go visit with him. And that's a fascinating story.
Well, let's tell it.
Things that he told us about how the communists in those days, they feared Legion of Mary people more than soldiers because they had the ultimate weapon, the rosary. I mean, it was an incredible.
Sweet.
Huh.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
we can tell it if you want.
Yeah. Well, if it comes in naturally, I mean,
Sure.
If not, but that's fine.
That's awesome.
Yeah. It was,
Welcome back to the Catholic Man Show. I'm David Niles, here with Adam Mcmahon and David Dean. We're talking about your trip, David, to Ireland, but really the purpose of the story is kind of where we're getting to, just the notion of redemption and suffering, good things coming out of tragedy. And obviously the crucifixion being the greatest example of this. So tell us, what was it like in the next weeks, processing, dealing with, the loss of these friends?
well, like I said, the first couple of weeks after, we obviously were very somber and things were very subdued, and we obviously were praying a lot for the boys and kind of trying to just process this, right? I mean, why would this happen? I mean, here's two just very good, innocent boys from Kansas, and we get to Ireland, and it's no one's fault necessarily. It's not the Irish fault. It's not
Right.
the Ireland people's fault. It's just this is what nature does, and really just trying to process that because, right, in some sense, there's nothing more real than death, right? I mean, it just like the old saying, nothing will focus you like somebody pointing a gun at your head or something, right?
Right.
I mean, you really focus your attention, and so in the same way, this really caused us to step back and focus and think and pray, and so we just obviously did that for a while, and we kind of did all during the trip, but at some point too, you have to go on. Once the decision was made, we're going to stay there because we were all taking courses, and professors obviously did talk to us a lot about these sort of things, about, okay, obviously it's a tragedy and we need to pray for these young men, but at a certain point too, like anything, we need to carry on, right? You need to start working on your classes again, and
right.
we need to do some of the other things that we're going to do here since we decided to stay. And they would say things like, of course, I think that's what Ed and Richard would want, right? They'd want us to carry on with what we're there to do. And so we did, and so we eventually kind of got back to a little more normal routine of just being students in Ireland. And so, but I'll never forget, Dr. Senior said one day that the two boys dying or drowning, and then kind of being a martyrs of sorts, that the redemptive part of it was that this may have been kind of the seed for what then came out of the program later, much like the martyrs of the early church. Obviously the boys weren't really a martyr in the sense
right.
they were killed by.
They didn't die. They weren't died for the faith,
yeah,
right?
It was obviously by nature.
It was an accident.
An accident. But nonetheless, that there's some mystery here. He would say that there's a reason for this. God has a reason, and so as time went on afterwards, and as I think the effects of the program spread, and there still are, like here, we have Clear Creek, right outside of Tulsa here, and just all the other good things that have happened. That in God's mysterious way, the drowning of these two boys was a way that it kind of a seed that helped spread things, just again like the martyrs in the early church. And so he would talk quite a bit about the redemptive nature of that, and I think that helped us a lot because, for example, I just converted to the church, and you got to remember, like literally a month or two before that, I'd converted about a month before we left for Ireland, and we had a lot of students in the program that weren't even Catholic. And then you had some students in the program that were Catholic, but maybe not all that devout, right? And then, of course, there were probably some that were. But anyway, we're still trying to process all this. Why did this have to happen? What does it mean? Why would God allow this? All the usual questions that one would ask. I mean, these are two just very innocent, young, good men. So I think the professors really tried to help us kind of work through that and process that, and why would say God allow this to happen, and why would it happen at all? And so I think that was a big part of it. And I think that what came from that, that same trip to Ireland, there was a group of about 10 or 15 guys. I went on the trip as well, but we all went to visit Foncombeau in France, and after that visit,
which is the mother house of Clear Creek.
Correct.
Abbey. Yeah.
Correct. And after that trip, as soon as we got back to the States, about a half a dozen young men left for Foncombeau within like a few months of getting back, to the States after this trip. And so again,
to go become monks.
Yes, as novices,
not just as a visit, but as a vocation.
Yeah, to be novices at Foncombeau. So, and several of those are still there, right? I mean, they're now they're at Clear Creek. They were the founding, a few of the founding members at Clear Creek. So, again,
Clear Creek wouldn't exist if it hadn't have been for that group of people.
Correct.
Yeah,
correct. And there was actually one or two that had already gone to Foncombeau. I mean, they were there as novices. They were, a couple of years older, so they obviously weren't on the Ireland trip. But but the big group that went was really from this group that visited during that semester in Ireland. We had to go across the channel, of course, over to France, and then we went to Paris, and then we took a bus down towards Foncombeau, because it's kind of hard to get to. It's out in the middle of nowhere. In France. So That's quite a journey, actually. You have to want to get there, right? You just don't.
Monasteries are often that way.
Yeah. You've got to have a good map, so again, you see a fruit that kind of comes from all this trip in general, and I would say tying that, the death of those two boys into the bigger picture here, that there's no question there's, I think, a cause and effect going on here.
I mean, I think anytime anyone experiences or is close to the death of a young person, especially, it does remind you that life is fleeting, and
it is.
At any moment, you could be called to an account. And so, we always think about like, oh, yeah, I'll die someday, like that's, it's like, oh, that's not even something that's real because it doesn't seem real, so far away. I'm not worried about it, but it could be a folly, if that's really our attitude.
No, that's right. We don't know. And I think it was one of the great lessons of the trip is what you just said, and that I think too that really learning about Mother Nature. I mean, we in the Midwest, we might be used to tornadoes, for example, or maybe certain parts of the country you have earthquakes, and so you kind of get used to that. But the power and the beauty of the ocean is incredible. I know after that trip, having grown up pretty much in the Midwest, such great respect for the ocean and kind of a love of it too. It's terrifying in one sense, and yet when it's placid and you're out looking at the sun on the kind of still waters, the shiny and ocean, that glare and all that, it's magnificent too. You see God's splendor and glory and magnificence in that, and what again? So back to what we said at the start, this immersion into reality, that a different sort of reality that you're going to find in the Midwest, but. So it was really just a great experience to see and hear even the fishermen. A curious fact about them is they don't even learn how to swim because
that's a little ridiculous. I think if I was a fisherman, I would definitely know how to swim.
Well, and I'm shocked. When Patty said that, we don't even learn how to swim, and so their thought is that. I mean, if you just fall off a small boat and your friends can kind of grab you and pull you back in, right? But if you fall off and no one knows it or whatever, somehow you end up in the water, what's the point? Right? You're not going to survive anyway. So why flail around?
Maybe you would if you could swim.
Well, I think hypothermia
is... The water's also so cold that swim, you're not going to go swimming.
No. But but then of course what we did one day was, it was the manly man thing, right? You had to man up,
right?
Right there in the bay, where we'd be somewhat safe anyway. But a group of us decided to go one day to go swimming in the bay there, and it was cold.
Yes,
very cold. And
water is much colder than air. That's the thing about it.
Yes, and so you kind of see the point. And again, I don't know whether that's a good idea to. As a fisherman, learn to swim or not, but they didn't, right? They just didn't bother, and of course they probably would have probably
wear
have
a
some
life jacket or something.
Yeah. So, but again, it's again looking at the world a little different way, and I think we haven't talked too much about the history, but the poetry and the history of Ireland is just another whole chapter of this that. I think we all grew a lot. I remember one of the last days we were there on the island, Professor Nellick, who was an English professor, and we were reading some Irish poetry, and it was just a beautiful, beautiful kind of spring day. And he just looked at us and he said, "Just go walk around the island because this will be one of your last days, and you'll learn more by just walking around the island than I could ever teach you." And we kind of, okay. We got up from our seats and we just went and walked around the island that afternoon, and just little small groups, and talked and kind of just took it all in and watched the tide come in, as you say, and just experience it.
So
Yeah.
a couple things that they did is, like we said, they put up a cross and memorial for the
Mhm.
2 boys. They also put commissioned stained glass windows in
Correct.
for the church. But one of the things they also did that we've been kind of waiting to tell is they wrote a whole poem about this. And if you're listening on the radio, you go check us out on thecatholicmanshow.com. Check us out on the podcast because we're going to have you read it. You have the poem framed. It was given to you. All the people who went on the trip got a copy of one. Got a copy of it. So we're going to have you read it.
Yeah, written by a famous Irish poet, right?
Yes.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, so go check us out on the podcast. David, thanks so much for joining us. We're on the Lord's team.
The winning side.
So raise your
And
glass.
cheers to Jesus. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So I think so.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit of a. So Brian Mcmahon is the author, correct?
Correct. Yeah, he was a real Irish poet at the time. If you look him up, he passed away, I think, back in '88 or 1990. I can't remember, but he's written plays, poetry, short stories. Again, he's a real Irish poet, and so unbeknownst to us, at some point during the semester, the professors obviously contacted him about writing a poem, and so the last week we were in Ireland, we all of us, all 100 or so of us, they had a big banquet at one of the castles there, and I feel terrible. I can't remember. I think it was Bunratty or maybe Napogue Castle. You know, there's a number of castles there in Ireland, a very kind of medieval castle with the big banquet halls and all that. And so unbeknownst to us, they announce it, and we all get on the buses. We go to this banquet, and part of it is then they introduce Brian Mcmahon, this Irish poet, and he stands up and he reads.
So he was there, not just telling about him. He was there. Okay,
he was
sweet.
there, and he wrote this poem in honor of Richard and Ed, and so he stood up and read it, recited it because it's his poem, and then we had a wonderful sort of medieval banquet, mead and all the food and whatnot and drink, and so and then afterwards they said that we would, once we got home, they would give us a copy of it. Which they sent, to all of us who were on the trip, and so even that evening, I think, was a very, beautiful and fitting tribute to the 2 boys, in the most sort of Irish poetic way that you could do it.
Yeah.
A poem written by a real Irish poet, and then celebrating that in this beautiful kind of ancient Irish castle. It's entitled Boffin's So Beautiful Isle, and there's a short little introduction to the poem. It says, a ballad lamenting in traditional fashion the accidental death by drowning at the Stags in Nishboffin, Galway, Ireland, on February 3rd, 1976, of Richard Mathis and Edward Mall, members of the Integrated Humanities program at the University of Kansas. So,
Okay.
this is the poem. I shall pluck my strings and softly sing as a sorrowful tale I unfold of a student band who left their native land in search of the wisdom of old. On the Kansas plain, they crossed the main, flying mile after wearisome mile, till to Ireland they came, and there they set sail for Boffin's so beautiful isle. Now, Boffin's a place which the Irish race holds fast in its love and its steam. To its rocky shore in the days of yore came Colman, his monks, and a dream. There they raised a shrine to the glory of Christ. They fasted and prayed in gale. The ruins still stand at the head of the strand on Boffin's so beautiful isle. The students, with love in their eyes, came to study, to write, and pray. At Murray's and Day's in that lovely place, their labors soon turned to play. While men of ideal made each vision seem real, and the blackbird with song did beguile, till they felt the cold breath of old Sergeant Death on Boffin's so beautiful isle. Two friends, hand in hand, they played on the strand. They climbed to the loftiest crags. They probed the hills and the flowing rills, till they came to the treacherous stags. Return, return, cried their friends in concern, for we trust not the dark ocean's veil. But the waters soon were their mournful tomb on Boffin's so beautiful isle. Then the radio sent its news of woe through length and breadth of the land, and soon the sad knell of the funeral bell was heard upon every hand. Then the island folk, as their sorrow broke, came thronging from rock and defile, and sharp and clean they passed the lonely keen on Boffin's so beautiful isle. The lark so gay at the break of day shall soar to the height of the sky, and the seagull glide over the broken tide to utter his piercing cry. The hare at morn shall leave his form and race for a pleasant mile, but never, never more shall these young men stroll on Boffin's so beautiful isle. They took them again to the Kansas plain, to the bountiful land of their birth, and they made their graves by the Missouri's waves, and laid them to rest in the earth. And many a comrade, lass and lad, who were wont but to laugh and to smile, bent their heads and cried for the young men who died on Boffin's so beautiful isle. At the close of day, should you chance to stray through Clifton to Clagan's gray pier, and in Patio's boat should you gently float to an island that's sunny and clear, and the churches glaze in color and blaze, a window shall you reconcile. So may God's mercy full on young Mathis and Mall, and on Boffin's so beautiful isle. So may God's mercy fall on young Mathis and Mall, and on Boffin's so beautiful isle. The end.
Nice.
So, yeah, it was very beautiful. Obviously, that night in that castle, there were lots of tears.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It was very... you know, again, that immersion into reality, right, of the tears of sadness and kind of tears of joy, tears of beauty, all the emotions of life just really kind of came out, and I think there was kind of a silence in it all too. That I mean, just for a few minutes of I just taken all that in.
I can imagine that you may have returned home. I don't know exactly how the best way to put this is, but knowing that you have with a greater dignity almost, you know, obviously you go home to your other friends and now there's something different. I have suffered something, you know, there's something about me, almost a nobility for having, I have gone through something real. I've gone through something important that I don't share with you. You know, it kind of there's this experience that now separates you and this, you know, this group of students from everybody else. And there's almost a dignity, you know, that I've done something you haven't, and it needs to be respected.
Yeah, clearly it obviously, as I said at the start, it really pulled us together as a group of students, and certainly with the professors. And it's something we had as long as, you know, the professors were still alive and around. We obviously shared this kind of incredible experience. But I think too, David, to that point, another thing that what I kind of came home with, and I think the others did too, was that it really puts in perspective what's important in life. Right, so, you know, we come back. We're in this sort of environment of what the world would have been like 100 years ago, And we come back to America, and it's very noisy and fast, and all the things we do in America to busy ourselves and actually isolate ourselves from reality. And so it was even more striking. It's like, okay, so much of what we worry about in our society and even our own lives is really not that important.
Right.
It's just not that important. And how distracted we are, by our culture, and that even when you get down, like even to your own family, for example, that there are certain things that are so much more important than others. And it's great, certainly with your family, to do the normal things, go have fun and hang out and just do kind of sometimes some kind of idle, leisurely things. There's nothing wrong with that, certainly, but it really pulls into a perspective. To your point earlier, why are we here? Life can be very short. You don't know when that day's coming, when God's going to call us.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a combination of, in a very spiritual way, being prepared for that moment. And yet, I think one of the hallmarks of the program, and certainly the Irish, is that there is, use the French term, there's a joie de vivre, right? I mean, enjoy life. We are meant to enjoy this life. God wants us to enjoy this life in a very proper way, right, and fun way. And we can do that and still at the same time take care of those, our obligations to God and family and so forth that we're required to do, even going above and beyond sometimes. And it's it was just a great lesson. You have to think we were all probably 18 to 21 years old at that time, living in a very sort of decadent culture, when we left on this trip, the late 60s, early mid 70s. So it really was, it kind of defined us in a way. We had this sort of camaraderie, and over the years, we've had a number of humanity program, reunions. And so we get together occasionally, or you go visit at the monastery and talk to some of the monks, and this will almost always come up in some fashion.
Sure. This
particular trip.
Well, was there a way, or was there a uniqueness to how the poetry helped the healing process? Like, is there something unique about poetry in general that helped with the grieving process, that helped with the unity process, that's unique to poetry and not other things?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's as you know, the program had a heavy emphasis on poetry and good literature. And so since we were in Ireland, as I said before, Professor Nellick taught an Irish poetry class that I referenced a moment ago. And we actually, or at least I did, I took a course from one of the professors there at Galway. It was an Irish literature. And they have such a tragic history. If you know Irish history, and their poetry and their songs are all about this tragic history. And yet, one of the hallmarks of the Irish is that in their songs and their poetry, there's a certain joy in the music of it, or the meter of it, that it's very kind of upbeat and positive in its expression, even though it's about a very tragic event. And it's a curious thing, combining this sort of joyful, even like meter in poetry or the literature, with these really horrific and tragic stories of Irish history. And again, they have that wonderful sense of humor, like the old man who introduced me to some really good tobacco, right?
Yeah.
And they laugh a lot and they sing a lot. One thing I haven't mentioned, and I should, is in the two pubs that the Irish are famous for. They get in there, they just start. It's all spontaneous. It's not planned. It's not like the Beatles are coming to some concert hall on Friday night, and you got to get in line and buy tickets. It just, they meet in a bar, and if the mood hits them, one of them has a fiddle, another has a bodhrán, the drum, and all of a sudden they're playing music and you're singing songs and people are dancing. It's all completely spontaneous, and that happened a lot, especially on the island. And some nights it wouldn't happen at all. And so they just laugh and they love one another and others, and it's such a beautiful, spontaneous spirit of, okay, life is good, and we need to have this sort of fun and celebration, even though we have all these tragedies.
Mm-hmm.
You know, whether it's historical ones or the boys and so forth, and drowning there. And again, what a valuable lesson. Back to my original point is putting all this into perspective. What really is important in life, and all the nonsense that we, myself included, I've done it. We chase, we chase these sort of nonsensical notions and dreams of ours, and they're really not all that important. And I think, so your question, the literature, the poetry, really brings you back to what is essential, and that's the beauty of it, right? I mean, if you take some of the poets, even William Butler Yeats, we read a lot of his poetry while I was there about, the Easter 1916 Rising, and he wrote a couple poems about all that, and it really brings that alive for you, that fight for their independence. Now, that was 1916, so obviously it happened way before we got there, and we're not even Irish, but it allows you to some way enter into that kind of mystery and the meaning of what that meant for the Irish to get out from underneath the heel of the British,
Mm-hmm.
Which they had suffered under, for centuries. And so, yeah, I think that's the beauty of it. It's poetry is an experience kind of through words, because as human beings, we can't just go out and experience everything in the world, right? It's just impossible. So poetry helps bring that experience to us and make it real. And the professors oftentimes would say it's kind of a participation in reality, but through words. Since we can't go back and visit the Battle of Thermopylae,
Right.
I mean, literally, right? We can go to Thermopylae, but you can't go fight in the battle; it's over,
Right.
And so, how do you enter into that? How do you enter into Odysseus' journeys, or Aeneas, going basically founding Rome? I mean, how do we? Well, we do it through the poetry. And it's powerful, and I think that's why Plato and some others have always sent up these, warning signs. Be careful of poetry; right? It's dangerous, and there's a certain truth there. But it's so powerful, right? And that's what you would be very careful. What poetry children read at a young age, and even maybe it's adults, because of the power and the emotion of it. It really does show us the goodness, or sometimes the badness of life, depending on the characters, or the beauty or the ugliness and so forth, the truth and the falsehood, and so I think it's going back. What the professors did so well, and especially it came out on this trip, was that we have to start at the beginning. I think a lot of people today want to just go read Aristotle or St. Thomas or somebody, or Plato, and that's great. I mean, those are wonderful authors. We all should at some point read those people. But first, we should read Mother Goose.
Yeah.
Yep. Right. Ideally, you would get Mother Goose on hear that on your mother's knee or your father's knee, right? And then these stories of sort of adventure, as we grow up through childhood. And then eventually some what we call the great books or the good books on up through high school. And then once we have that, that's the soil, right? And that's the soil in which then, the study then of philosophy and theology and so forth, that's the soil that it'll grow in.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have obviously the grammar and logic and rhetoric, the trivium, quadrivium, and in some ways to try to what the program did was to give us that soil first, because that's the natural order of things, and that it's not good to try to sort of jump over certain pieces of that natural order. Sometimes you kind of maybe have to, because if you didn't get something and when you were younger, you've got to play catch up, right? Or shortcut or whatever.
Right.
But ideally, this is how it should work. And I think that's why it was so powerful. I think that's why so many conversions came out of the program. And what a lot of people don't know is then even some other Christians, those who weren't Catholic, they became stronger in their own particular faith, or maybe went home and got more involved in their own church at home And so, in their own way. And I think that's what it did. It was like a fire that kind of lit our souls.
Mm-hmm.
The way they did it, and and I think that's why you have these vocations and all these people that go out and have done so many good things, that had gone through the program after they had finished, and that legacy of the program, lives on through these different people doing different things.
Well, David, thank you very much for being with us today and for sharing your story, for sharing this beautiful poem. Anything else?
No, I mean, I think it's a beautiful poem. I think it's I couldn't imagine being there and listening to it for the first time after through that event. That would have been.
Mm-hmm.
But I think
would have been powerful.
There's beauty. There's beauty that can come from tragedy.
Oh, absolutely. And it's, this poem is the perfect example of that. The beauty that does come out of a tragedy, and I think that's why tragedy is so compelling to us, right? I mean, even Aristotle said his Poetics, it's because it really is the mode that pulls on our hearts, and then how do you process that, and how do you come out of it on the other side of a tragedy? And this poem, I think, expresses it beautifully. And again, the lessons that are really lifelong that go with it. I mean, you look at the stained glass windows there, and obviously that's Jesus on the boat, kind of calming the waters, and probably Peter there getting up, pulling the fish out. It looks like and so and I'm sure that's our Lady, Stella Maris, Star of the Sea, I'm guessing, there in the middle window, and I think just to know that that God is in charge, and our Blessed Mother's there to help, and that He, even in tragedies, our Lord and Our Lady will, still the waves, the turbulent waves of life, and that we have great consolation with them and from them, and that's what we need to learn.
Yep.
That is really what is important in life.
Well, David, I'm grateful for you. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a blast. We'll have to have you on again here soon.
I enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Well, we're on the Lord's team.
The winning side.
So raise your glass.
Right.